You're listening to The State of Work, the podcast by Lano. The State of Work is about finding your place in the changing world of work as an individual or an organization. In each episode, we dive into some of the benefits and limitations we face when it comes to remote and flexible work. We talk about how we work, how we hire and manage people, and how we live in this increasingly global workplace. I'm your host, Maddie Duke, and today I'm speaking with Jenny Jung and Anna Löw, people and operations experts and co-founders of MindTheLeader. MindTheLeader is a collective of coaches and consultants dedicated to holding space for leaders to grow through organizational development, training, and systemic coaching. Investing in leaders is one of the most impactful tools that fast-growing companies can use to help build and scale successful, resilient teams, yet it's often overlooked. I spoke to Jenny and Anna about this and their work supporting founders and leaders in growing their leadership capacity. Hi Jenny, hi Anna, and welcome to the podcast.
Hi.
Hello.
Thanks so much for joining me today. Could you just tell me where you're joining me from?
I'm joining from my Berlin-based living room.
And I'm joining from a co-working space in Cologne because sometimes even in the pandemic, I have to stare at other walls.
Yes, it's so good to get into a different space sometimes. So the two of you founded MindTheLeader in 2018. Can you tell me in your own words what MindTheLeader is and what led you to joining together on this project?
Yeah, sure. So I think the genesis of MindTheLeader was a little bit tied to me leaving my full-time position at the time, which was a VP People and Organization role in a fast-growing tech startup here in Berlin. And I had decided to take some time to go on a little learning journey to qualify further as a systemic coach. And I had my own experience with peer coaching previously, and I felt that this format made a lot of sense. So coaching in a group setting with people who share the same role in different organizations made a lot of sense for people in the people operations and HR space, because they typically have no true peers inside their organizations, but they have a lot of need to exchange and to have a place to turn to. So I think the phrase we had in mind originally was, when everybody turns to HR, where does HR turn to? And that was a notion that I shared with Anna, who I had met a few years earlier through a role that I held in an investment vehicle, where Anna was leading the people function in Giant Swarm already, and that investment vehicle was invested in her company, and so that's how we met. And I knew that we shared this notion, and then we thought, hey, this is really something that we want to do together as sort of a prestigious hobby, to focus on peer coaching formats, for example, for HR professionals. And that's also the first thing that we did together. That was a long answer for a short question.
Okay. All good. Anna, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
It was interesting for us, like, who takes care of HR? And then obviously you can also think of that coaching is actually a format which has the ability to scale, but it's kind of complicated. And we love thinking around how to create a format, how to create a program and a structure that does not only need to apply to the HR space, but you could also do it like in-house for a certain hierarchy level in a company, or also for other functions when you have a mixed group. And having people in the same boat was something you could think about. How does coaching scale? And this was also an interesting experiment, how to facilitate that and how to create structures that work out. And we had an additional layer, because I'm like now for 7 years in a fully remote company, that we also thought about how can we bring people together who are not in the same place? How can we make coaching a bit more remote? Like we all know now after 1.5 years of Corona that this is possible, but sounds strange, but 3 years ago it was something different.
Yeah. Jenny, you mentioned systemic coaching. I'd like to, early on in the discussion, just kind of clarify, like, what is systemic coaching and how does it differ from other types of coaching?
Well, systemic coaching is rooted in systems theory. I think it stems from the 70s, based on the writings of Niklas Luhmann. The way that systemic coaching is interpreted today, or also in the institute that I'm part of, is that it borrows a lot from that theory, but also includes a particular type of worldview or of a very humanistic approach to coaching. So first of all, it's really based in constructivism. So we assume that each client that we see has their own construction of reality, and that it's not something that we necessarily need to share in order to be able to work successfully together. And we also believe that it's a very resource-oriented approach, which believes that you have a huge repertoire of possible behaviors that you draw from depending on the circumstances that you're in. So, Anna might behave differently when she and I are having a glass of wine, other than when she's talking to the Kita teacher of her daughter versus sitting in a board meeting, right? But she's one person, but she has a range of different resources that she draws from based on context. Mm-hmm. So maybe those are important notions. And then the most important one, I guess, is to think of the world that in a circular way, and in a way of, it's interesting for us to discover patterns in thought, patterns in behavior. Systemic coaching assumes that it's never just one person who impacts the way that a situation plays out, right? But that organizations are complex living systems, and you are always just a part of a system. So in order to successfully work on whatever is your topic, we also need to take into consideration the systems that you're a part of, and the rules and patterns that these systems move in, the logic that they have. So it's not possible to look at a topic or a problem isolated from the context and from the person.
Yeah, maybe to underline what Jenny says. So one super important aspect, as she mentioned, is humans are not, humans behave.
Yeah.
And the second thing is, and then the need for coaches comes in to support, is usually if you're in this complex system organization, you do not change your strategy unless the pain is big enough. Because in general, humans don't have the tendency to change the strategy unless they don't feel that something is not congruent anymore. So I always go the same way to the bakery, because it's the shortest one. And unless I don't feel that I need to change going to the bakery in a different way, I would never ever do it. That's very normal. But if I start feeling the pain, then I can think about, okay, what should I do? And if I, for myself, need support, which patterns to observe, which questions to ask myself. And if I realize I cannot do that for my own, like the bakery example, there's a big construction site, I just use another street, then systemic coaches can help.
Right. That's a great example.
I would still like to add one thing to that, is that in my experience, it's either the pain is too big or the promise is good enough. So it has to be either or, right? Either the pain of taking this route becomes too painful because construction site, or it smells bad or something, or the promise of going the extra mile, burning more calories so I can deserve that donut that I'm going to buy is powerful enough to motivate me to change my way to the bakery, so to say. But it's usually the pain that is more powerful than the promise.
I can imagine.
However, many people come based on a promise.
Well, it makes me want to know, like, at what point do people end up tending to seek coaching? Do clients of yours usually come to you because they feel this pain, or is it rather through there's a need for mediation? Yeah, at what stage do leaders seek help, and when should they maybe?
Maybe to get that broken down into a bit, because obviously it depends on who or what is the client. And what happens from past to now. I'd say that in the past, it was way more when individual pain is big enough, people seek out for solutions. Today, there is a shift, especially in the business context, that organizations try to implement coachings in very different ways, whether the organization itself has something they'd like the coachee to work on, but also they offer the space that some of their exec teams, employees can just sort out certain questions with a coach. And there are also organizations now that try to do coaching in advance because they know, I mean, there are certain things every organization has to face. We are all humans, and even if you're built paradise, it's still we are humans. And they try to sort certain things in advance. Mediation upfront is quite unlikely. So mediation involves always 2 or more parties. In most of the cases, there are exceptions. And then usually there is a conflict, at least from my experience.
Yeah. I also, I feel like it depends a lot on how clients end up sitting in that room with me. If they have chosen to come, it's most often a pain that has led them to work with me. But many times it's organizations sending them, and then it can still be either, hey, we give you this because we understand that your role is hard and challenging, and here's this opportunity for you to work on whichever thing you may need to work on. That's luxurious. It's also makes for clients that aren't fully aware of what could the format actually do for me. So sometimes these processes take longer to pick up speed. There might also be cases where somebody has been prescribed coaching. So somebody has consistently been getting bad feedback, and now they, send them to you to sort of solve that problem. And that also makes for a very different type of atmosphere, and it changes a lot in the initial relationship between the client and the coach, and it might not make for a successful process unless you are able to really form trust and to really sort of win over the client for the format. But that takes a different approach.
Yeah, and what I also experienced that very often people come with a certain topic, and then you start working around this topic, and you start discovering the underlying principles, and then you realize maybe, or the client at least, he or she decides that you're heading in another direction. This happens quite often, and especially in these triangle constellations, organization, client, coach, you mentioned before.
Yeah. So for me, when I take on these cases, I make sure that between me and the organization, I have the complete freedom to work with my client in whichever way he or she and I feel like this is most useful for them. Because they might show up with something work related. In session 2, you realize you need to talk about something entirely private. But once that is addressed, will make a huge difference and have a huge impact on how they feel at work. So why wouldn't we be able to work on that,
Yeah. Are you seeing any overarching trends in terms of what sort of questions founders and co-founders come to you with? Like what are some typical topics?
Many times the questions are around their own role clarity. So am I the right person to be leading this company right now? And oftentimes it comes from this blurry feeling that something's not working, or that something's not congruent, or that they don't feel like they're performing as well as they could be, or they have they come with this idea of what a CEO should look like that they have adapted from a book that they've read, or from a company that is maybe 10 years riper than theirs. And then they get really frustrated because it's not what their reality looks like. And then they feel like, oh, I'm not right, or I'm not capable enough. And then so oftentimes it's finding a space to reflect, what is actually needed from me right now? What do my co-founders need from me? What does the organization need from me? What do my investors need? What do the clients need? And so on. And then how can I best serve all these needs while at the same time staying authentic and true to my own values, right? Because, and often it's just helping somebody make decisions. And looking at it together, and just holding space for reflection.
Yeah, I would say there is two tendencies. Tendency number one is that leaders are way more open to discuss questions they have with other people. So we have this hierarchical pyramid in our head. There is the C on top, and on top it's very lonely. And I'd say that many years ago it was like, okay, I'm lonely, I have to deal with all the things on my own. And this is definitely a trend that these people realize, however their organizational form will end up, if it's servant leadership or whatsoever, but it's important to have a sparring partner. This is one thing I would definitely say. And the second trend, that this seeking help does not mean that they necessarily need someone who gives them advice, that they way more need a sounding board, understanding they have the issue, the question, or let's call it the problem, and they accept that it's theirs, and that they just need a framework, a process, the sounding board to get it done.
Yeah, maybe that's something to add to this initial question that you had around systemic coaching, is a super important difference between that and other types of coaching, is that we do not need to have any expertise necessarily, but our expertise is the process, right? It doesn't mean that we can't also have expertise and that we swap hats every once in a while because we know something and we could actually give advice, but that's rarely the modus operandi. But more often it is helping somebody else figure out their truth and their solution. So they own the problem. They qualify something as a problem. It doesn't matter if I think it's problematic. As long as my client thinks it's problematic, that's what it is. And the same goes for a solution. And that is also, that can be frustrating on the coaching side, because also coaches have opinions, we try to leave them at home as much as we can, but of course, sometimes you have a strong feeling or a strong sense of, or something that you would qualify then personally as a good solution. And that's not something that you are invited to introduce into the coaching process unless it's explicitly asked for. So sometimes clients decide that their problem is solved, and you leave as a coach and you think, oh God, I'm not sure this is solved, but that really doesn't matter. And that's the beauty of coaching, is as long as the client walks away and feels like they have moved on, they have taken an important step, then that's the criteria for success.
Yeah, and I think this thing was a big part of the peer coaching format success of MindTheLeader, because this program obviously was done with us both. And when we did the HR leaders round, and I'm working in an HR leader function and be systemic coach, but sometimes they treated stuff I couldn't be quiet. I just had to raise my hand. No. This is totally different. I will now explain you what your problem is, and I'm happy to share my solution. I will send you over the documents after our call. And this was also okay, because I'm careful with humans. That that was not the problem, but this was a very good dynamic between Jenny and me, because she could easily stand that and just had it in her head. And I sometimes just had to wave the red flag and say, no, I will send over the ESOP regulations. You need to deal with these legal requirements. I like your fantasy, but it's a no.
Yeah. It's interesting that you can bring different skills to the coaching process based on your own independent experiences and expertise.
Yeah.
You mentioned that some people are sent to a coaching program by their employer or by the company. Do you think that's something that ideally all leaders and founders should have, that kind of resource?
Yeah. And in an ideal world, everybody gets the type of support that's helpful for them. So, and coaching is not the answer for everybody, right? There are people who need a mentor, who need somebody who's done exactly what they're doing and is just 15 years ahead.
Yeah.
And other people need an expert consultant that has a doctor-patient approach. I understand your problem. Here's the prescription. And so coaching can be a super powerful resource, but it's not necessarily suited for every question or for every person. So I would say it's great if organizations see that they need to offer support, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it always has to be coaching.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd allow myself to say that coaching definitely should be part of a toolbox modern organizations have, and then figure out, is it helpful for the team, the individual, the leader? Because that's a question you need to declare, but have that in your toolbox to support employee or leadership team. It's super important.
Yeah, I would say so. At the end of the day, it's a relationship building game, right? It's something that happens between two people or between a coach and a group, and the conversational atmosphere that is being created and whether or not you can actually successfully work depends on, do we share an idea of what is possible and allowed in this space? So if somebody walks in thinking, I'm going to sit through this because it's an exercise that I need to do, it becomes very hard for me to work with them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, can imagine.
And it's super interesting because all the things you said regarding the relationship building 100% alike apply to the startup environment where I'm usually working in, where there is nothing defined.
Yeah,
that's quite interesting.
That's true. But I find there is more openness and more curiosity, because this MO of experimenting with things, quickly throwing away stuff, is so ingrained in the way that they're wired, is that you can just say, you know what, today we're going to try this. And if this doesn't work, next week we're going to do coaching completely differently.
Lano makes it easy to hire the best talent on the planet. Companies of any size can hire and pay employees in more than 150 countries. Backed by a network of top employers of record, Lano takes care of compliant contracts, local tax law, and international payments. From full-time to freelance, the Lano platform has everything you need to grow your global team. Find out more at lano.io. On your website, you mentioned authenticity and resilience and curiosity being really key elements of kind of the future of leadership. Or maybe you could expand on those, what they look like, and maybe how we can think about them when it comes to leadership today.
Yeah. I think the one on more, actually, I can't say that one is more important to me than the other, but I find that the basis for most the leadership development processes is resilience, meaning that in order for me to be able to take care of others, which is what leadership might look like depending on your organization and idea of leadership, is that you first need to learn to take care of you. And if you don't take care of yourself and you are constantly burnt out, or you're not managing your energy well, or you are constantly in a situation where you feel incongruent, meaning that I am always asked to act against my values, for example, or I consistently feel like something is off in the way that we're doing things. If you don't make space and time to look at these things and really truly understand them, and then coming to decisions based on this, I think it's impossible to be a good leader. Because good leader also means that somebody to take care of you also means that somebody who will give me an idea of what the desired behavior in the specific organization might look like.
I'd like to add 2 points, and I try to make them concrete. For me, definitely a modern aspect when it comes to leadership thoughts is that you need to develop the ability to say, I don't know, and deal with it. And this sounds very easy, but it's not. If you feel responsible for the organization, the employees, if you care about, if you have your own idea of the future, this is an important aspect. I'd consider modern leaders that this is a super important skill to develop. And the second skill, what I realized very often, which is helpful, and I think it was not so important in the past, is the ability to switch the perspective. What does my behavior, how could that be for employees or all other stakeholders? This is something I realized. And I had great bosses in the past who were more the old leadership style, and they definitely would not have considered changing the perspective as an important part of their leadership role. That does not mean that they are bad, but I think this will be way more important in the future.
Yeah, definitely.
And then also I think depends on the context that we're moving in. So it'll take different qualities from somebody who leads in a startup environment than somebody who leads in a different type of organization or form. And in the startup environment, I don't know is a very important sentence, and being able to handle ambiguity is even more important, because if you are somebody who relies on having a stable plan or any type of stability really to function well, then it's just not the right environment for you to be leading other people in. Right?
Yeah.
And so you need to have this tolerance for ambiguity and also high frustratability, so to say.
Yeah. Yep. Really
Which
interesting.
then always ties back to being resilient.
Resilient to all of these to this environment, whichever environment you're in. Yeah. Or the triggers that are in that environment for you personally. If you generally don't handle frustration or ambiguity well, you need to build that resilience to handle that.
Yeah. And then another trend that I am very, very grateful for that we have today in leadership, and then tied to that also in coaching, is that all of a sudden there seems to be a permission to need help. And also way more awareness around the behavior that I bring into my organization will shape this organization. So if I don't clean up my shit, if I'm not aware of my triggers, if I'm not aware of my most favorite projections that I'm making on people, or how I am addressing every male that has gray hair, like I used to address this old teacher of mine, blah, blah, blah. If you don't know yourself well, and if you don't know all these, these notions and triggers that you're bringing into the organization, you will one day be very surprised by the funny and quirky and dangerous and weird blossoms that you will find 3 hierarchy levels below you.
Mm-hmm.
If you're on top of this organization and you consistently bring, if you're consistently unaware of all the assumptions that you're making about the world and that you are introducing into your organization, for example, working long hours means working well.
Yeah.
Or I don't know. I mean, there are so many. I don't want to everything that I believe around the world, I will introduce into my organization. So I better know my shit so that I can, intentionally design my organization, or at least understand why things are the way that they are, and then own it. And then you don't have to worry about, oh my God, why is it happening like this? But then it's because I do this every meeting. Oh, yay.
Yeah. And especially in startup environment, when it comes to founding teams, this is super important for the root of success, because knowing your shit is very good, but knowing the shit of your co-founders and they know yours, it's a next step. And this step is definitely a trend I see from founding teams asking me to support with them. Let's get to know each other. And that's definitely something I haven't seen 10 years ago. So much.
That's true. And that's now most of the one of the most common inquiries that I'm getting is founder teams who say we want to be coached together.
Yeah. Okay. That's interesting. Earlier in the discussion, you both kind of mentioned, where does HR turn if everyone turns to HR? Often startups don't even, or sometimes they don't have HR teams yet. So it's the leaders kind of doing all of this. And where do the leaders turn when everyone's turning to the leaders? What do we do when things are growing and expanding so rapidly, and it doesn't feel like there's time to step back and get to know your founding team, or review where your pain points are and what needs work and what needs solutions? Yeah. What would your advice be, I guess, in that sort of like really rapid growth situation, when in some ways it would make sense for people to kind of stop and slow down and seek the help that they need, but they don't see that as necessarily valuable enough to slow down enough to do it? And even if coaching is just one part of the toolkit, like what other resources are there?
I mean, the good thing is when you start founding a company and you have all the fantasies about that you may have rapid growth, think about these things in advance, that you have the supporting nets that will tell you that you forgot about to breathe. You don't need to know anything in advance. That's not doable when you build a company, I guess. But investing in HR, for example, is something that is also definitely a trend. You see that there is this new rule of thumb that every 7 employees, you need to hire someone taking care for employees, whether this is recruiting, admin, or whatever. But every 7 people, this is quite a lot. You also see it in salaries for HR people in the startup environment. There's a tremendous race over the last 10 years. And then hopefully have experts who take care of the different aspects of growth, whether if it's that from now on you have to deal with having a global workforce, that means different administrative aspects, that means different cultural aspects, that means how to operate in the remote environment.
Yeah, I would like to say something about that, because when organizations grow really fast, especially when in this first initial growth moment, where sort of the boundary that I have in my head is that it used to be a level of complexity that one head or maybe 2 or 3 heads were able to, hold or to contain. And now every employee you add on top of a certain amount of people, let's say maybe it's around 30 or so, the complexity of the organization will start growing exponentially. So at some point, I don't think working with individuals on their individual leadership capacity is the answer to this complexity build up. It's still valuable, and regardless of the stage of the organization, it's always a good idea to have coaching resource for your leadership team. But at some point, you need to acknowledge that the organizational system in itself is so complex, and it has its own dynamic that is no longer in control of single people, but it's a living organism. and it changes every day. And with each little intervention that any given person in the system can do every day, something will change. So how do you consult that? It's definitely not one-to-one coaching, but then we're in the realm of organizational development, right? Which might also be somebody who's systemically trained, but is no longer only a coach, but also an expert on organizational development, right? And can help you step back and at least get a glimpse of analysis. A thorough analysis of what's going on will not be possible anymore because too many moving pieces are at play. But then it's helpful to have somebody who can look at the organization from the outside together with you and run a series of analysis, so to say, either together with you, together with the team, from the customer's perspective, and so on. So, and take stock of what's going on, and then from there figure out what might my levers be. And you always, I mean, and it's never going to be a sure shot, because then we start working with, what do we see? How do we explain this? What are the hypotheses that we build based on the observations that we've been making, right? So my observation might be that many people are leaving the organization. And here's the explanation that the organization is offering so far. Our leadership is bad. Yeah. So now they come to you and they say, please, Jenny, coach my leadership team, because so many people are leaving the organizations because my leadership team is bad. But there are a multitude of other possible reasons why your employees might be leaving. And they are organizational, right? They are interactional. They are circular.
Leadership is just one small part.
This is one thing, one important thing, because it has a steering function, leadership. But it doesn't mean that they control everything. So sometimes you need to take into account not only the leadership team, but employees, customers, or you need to just sort of create a picture of the organization together that you can then look at. So, you know, giving somebody the external perspective and see, this is what I can see. What do you make of that when I tell it to you this way? Because of course I'm seeing completely different things than you will see from the outside. And then from there, it needs to be very, very close collaboration between an inside person or a group of inside stakeholders who want to work on the organization and somebody or a group of external people who will help you from the outside. And it'll probably not be answered with, we'll do this one format. We'll do one leadership offsite and then it's solved. But it might be, we're doing this leadership offsite and there we decide what are the other 3 things that we need to do. And then we do these 3 things and then we take stock again and so on. So it's tedious. It's a lot of work. And that's also why not many companies who are growing rapidly are investing in these processes, because by the time that we've addressed the initial problem, the organization has already, become a completely different organization with new problems and new needs. So in this rapid growth phase, it just doesn't make sense to think about, I want to intentionally develop this into something completely different, because we don't know what we don't know yet. But there are moments, maybe right after you've scaled up or right before you've done so, where it's useful to take stock and realign again and ask yourselves, are we all looking at the same goal? Do we all have the same horizon, or is my horizon 3 months and yours is 5 years? So I think, yes, that's again a very long answer to
it's okay.
Yeah, but I think this is super, super important, and I try to paraphrase it as a too long didn't read. So number 1, offering one-on-one systemic coaching to your leadership team is not the solution to everything, especially when it comes to organizational development in growth or rapid growth phase. This is another discipline. But even though their systemic elements can definitely help, that you don't run into the danger that someone bring up the idea of, let's do the Spotify model, period. That's definitely something, I experience very often. So it's the willingness to accept that organizational development is a horrible task to do because it takes time. It's nothing predefined. You sometimes have to talk about emotions, but it's worth all the effort and to reserve time for it from the very beginning with everyone involved. Definitely not only the HR department. That's not going to work out. Might be a good advice.
Thank you. Anna, I wanted to ask you actually, Jenny, as well, like, do you think that there's a leadership problem in startups? Like, often someone has a brilliant idea and they're not necessarily suited to be a leader. Do you think that that's true, or do you think anyone can kind of lead?
I think that's absolutely true. And I think if you look at founders, many people start a company not to become a leader, but they start a company to realize an idea that they have, or to be in a function that is more visionary, let's say. But a great visionary or a very good charismatic winner of resources, which is what you need to have in the early days of a company as a CEO, is not necessarily the same profile as your stable ideal leadership figure. And sometimes these two qualities can meet, or there are many other possible qualities as well. But more often than not, they don't. And that's, I would say that's okay. In the first phase of a business, the charismatic factor and the, getting excited around a shared vision and working in a family logic where, we don't really need leadership yet because it works in a group dynamic logic. Here we are, this is not an organization yet. It's a group. And groups operate by completely different principles. But once it turns into an organization, so when a critical amount of people, there's all these ideas around how many pizzas can still feed a group and so on. But like once this critical point is reached, then it's that's the hour of the leadership, so to say. So by then you need to start figuring out who are your leaders. And if you don't have any, you might want to bring some, because only training the ones who are already there is also risky business.
Yeah, and for founders, it's also dangerous when they force themselves to become a working person they do not want to be. It's way more their job to design an organization where they can be as they want to be, because then they keep the charismatic and spirit which is needed in the beginning way longer than when they force themselves to fill out formulas to now deal with the stereotype.
Yes, some great points there, and plenty of things to consider when it comes to developing or finding the right leaders for your business. So thanks very much, Anna and Jenny, for joining me today. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
The State of Work is available wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also find us on Instagram or Twitter by searching for The State of Work. For more information and links to further reading, check out our show notes at podcast.lano.io. Thanks for listening, and see you next time on The State of Work.